In this episode of Unveiled, I offer a brief history to the beginning of Paola Lane Magazine. It's a perfect example of how starting with something small and sprinkling it with a bit of faith can lead to the rebirth of long-lost dreams. Welcome to Unveiled Life and Godliness, the show where we explore next level living and pull back the veil to the beautiful and miraculous within the day-to-day through a God-infused life. This is a podcast of Paola Lane Magazine. Get ready for insightful conversations, real-life examples and stories, interesting interviews, and actionable tips to take you to the next level. I'm your host, Laura Prather, and the founder and editor of Paola Lane Magazine, and I'm thrilled to have you on this journey with me. Now a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets cried out to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord, and the creditor has come to take my 2 children to be his slaves." And Elisha said to her, "Well, what shall I do for you? Tell me, what do you have in the house?" And she said, "Your servant has nothing in the house except a jar of oil." It's a beautiful day here at Table Rock Lake, and welcome back to issue number 2. Not issue, I'm in magazine mode here. It's episode number 2, restarting with what's in your hand. And I called it restarting because as you get older, you realize that you don't just start one time because you fall over and over again because there's multiple failures and you're constantly having to get up and restart. But there's a lot of wisdom and learning in that. But whether you're starting for the first time or restarting, start with what's in your hand. So today I'm going to be talking about, as I said in the intro, about my magazine, how I got started. And I'm just going to give you just a really small snippet of that. The magazine started with an idea. It was really like this little whisper in my spirit, and I didn't have any particular talent other than a love of life and learning. I heard God just speak to me. There was this little voice inside of me that said to take a risk and do something I wasn't qualified to do, and I paused and hesitated on it, but eventually I said yes to that little voice. Back when I was a child, really a young teen, probably around 12 years old, I received my first subscription to Victoria magazine, and I fell in love with it. In fact, I ordered my own calling cards. I never had anybody to give them to, but I had calling cards with my name on it, and think Pride and Prejudice and Anna Green Gables. I was a huge fan of Jane Austen and Emily Bronte, so the Victoria magazine just really fed into all of that. But one of the other magazines I really enjoyed was National Geographic, especially as I got older. And as soon as I could get my hand on one, I just really started to dream about what it would be like to be a photojournalist. So in high school, I took photography classes, and that was my first step toward that dream. When I reached college, I wasn't exactly sure what my dream would be. I was really insecure as a person, but I went ahead and I signed up to join the college newspaper as a photographer, and I hoped that, as throughout the years that maybe I could start writing as well. But in that first semester, my skills as a photographer, shall we say, questioned and weren't exactly welcomed, and they didn't use my work. So I was really discouraged, and after a semester, I quit, and honestly, I lost that dream. I never ever thought of that dream again. And in fact, it's like I lost it. So all of us, we used to start with dreams. Little boys sometimes want to be firefighters, and girls can be too. I mean, whatever we want. Kids have their dreams, and the imagination of a child is one of the tragedies of growing older, because we lose that special gift to imagine anything with age. Somehow, with each year, the dreams of a youthful heart just fade until they are absorbed into the craziness of life. Things, we get a dose of reality after college. Life is just not as peaches and cream. I think we realize that our parents really protected us as children, that they shielded us from the harsh realities of life. And so when we leave school and we get out on our own, we're like smacked in the face, with the cold water of reality. And we lose that, in that discouragement, the desire to dream again. And some people never, ever pick it up again, but others we do. And, but however, after school and we're on our own and we're building families and getting into relationships and finding our paths in life, we become consumed with just taking care of our families and paying bills. We're busy like birds, working hard to live and breathe and raise our children well. And then one day the home is empty, and the demands on our calendar are less, and everything is different. The world is unrecognizable, not to mention our bodies. And we realized that the last time we looked up, we were kids ready to change the world. And now the younger kids are telling us to get out of the way because they want to change the world. At least that's what it seemed like it happened to me. One day I found myself suddenly thrown from the crazy train of life. And when I looked up and the calendar said that I was 46 and not 17, I realized I wasn't sure of who I was or where I was going, not to mention thinking, how on earth did I get here? And yet in all of it, there was still a glimmer in my childish heart for something amazing. As a youth, I did have the joy and privilege of traveling the world. The trips were for humanitarian or ministry purposes, which really afforded me the raw view of life in other cultures, versus the very polished and beautified tourist experience. I visited places such as Scotland, France, Spain, Switzerland, and even Belarus and Guatemala. Each place was so unique. And the trips that I took around all around the world, not around the world, but all over the world, they took place between the ages of 17 and 26, before marriage and kids, and it really opened my imagination to dream big. However, there was a disconnect between dreaming and living that dream, and we'll just call it immaturity, really. Those trips were all in the 80s and 90s, and then it wasn't until 2016, the year that I was thrown from the crazy train. Like I used to be violently thrown from the metal merry-go-rounds at the playgrounds back in the 70s. Seriously, we need to bring those back. It's a great lesson of how joy and pain often go together. Okay, so let's go back to 2016. This was the year I closed a brick and mortar boutique business I had in downtown Colorado Springs. And afterwards, I lay exhausted in my home office one day. I was just on the floor and I felt like a total failure. I recall looking up at my corkboard that was on the wall, and I had pinned an article about starting with what's in your hand. So I opened my Bible to 2 Kings 4, where there's a story of a poor widow woman with 2 sons and their encounter with a prophet, Elisha. This woman was desperate, and all she could see was what she didn't have. And I totally related to that. In steps Elisha, and he completely changes the dialogue, and he asked her what she did have. There was this aha moment for me, even though I'd read the story so many times. finally it just seemed applicable. You know, I had been really crying out to God and inviting him. And I think that was the key. I was really inviting him to teach me. And that's how you live a God-infused life. And so when we do that, then he's able to reveal things to us. So it was when I was as I was laying on that floor, I was feeling really sorry for myself and I couldn't see what I did have. The rest of the story is how God miraculously multiplied what she did have, not out of the blue while she watched from the sideline, but God multiplied as she worked with what she had. She had to go out and find extra jars, empty jars, and then pour what little she had into those jars. When she couldn't do anything else, in her case, she ran out of jars, and then the miracle stopped. I really recommend going back and reading that for yourself. That's in 2 Kings 4, and just really take your time to ponder it and invite God into the story as you're reading it, and he will speak to your heart. What I did learn was this was my opportunity to learn next level living. I didn't think I had anything, but then realized I had acquired multiple skills from starting and operating my own businesses for many years. I could build a WordPress website. I knew the basics of Facebook for business, which back then was different than it is now. A lot of people really didn't know how to get started with their own business page. I also had basic graphic design skills. I could write blogs, design newsletters. These things they don't sound like very much, and it wasn't like I was excellent at them. I just kind of knew the basics, but it was my little bit of oil. It didn't look like much because professionals in any of those areas would have laughed at my meager skills, but it was more than what others had. There were people who needed my oil. So I contacted a friend, and she's like the network queen of Colorado Springs. And I asked if she knew of anyone that needed help. Within a week, I had my first client and I launched a new business. The thing is, that business wasn't my passion. It wasn't my end game at all. But it was just one step forward. It was the little bit of oil to get me to the next level. And those little steps forward ultimately prepared me for the launch of Paola Lane Magazine in 2022. If I had not been able to see what I did have and not been able to see what I could do, there would be no magazine today. I couldn't have even imagined the magazine being possible. I don't see it happening. But back in 2016, even the thought or the dream or vision of a magazine wasn't even a blip on my radar. I didn't even read magazines back then. And even in 2021, it still wasn't on my radar. But when God whispered in my heart, and then he used other people to be a fan to my heart's hidden desires, I opened my eyes to see that I had small stepped my way into my dream. It wasn't until after my first magazine issue was printed. I started out as a digital issue. So issue number 2 was the first time I actually printed the magazine, and I held it in my hand. And at that moment, God reminded me of my dream as a child to be a photojournalist. I had completely forgotten. I actually started crying because I was like, oh my goodness, God just fulfilled my dream, and I didn't even know it. Here I was holding a magazine that I owned. I wrote most of it and even published some of my own images. They weren't that great, but they were published. And he fulfilled my younger self's heart cry beyond what I could have ever imagined on my own. And God is so good like that. We small step our way into our dream. And a lot of times we don't even know where we're going. We just have to trust that the steps that God is leading us on, even though they don't look like the right direction. Like I said, when I started that business helping other people, like I was writing blog posts, I was doing all of those things. I was helping with websites, writing newsletters. I didn't have a passion for that. I actually really didn't like doing that. But I trusted that the steps I was taking and the direction I was going, that God was leading me, and that it would lead me to a good thing. And it did. He brought me into a place that I could not have even imagined. Before I I wrap up, I have a very special freebie exclusively for my podcast listeners. It's a free digital copy of my very first magazine issue, #1, for the beauty of the earth. It is still so impactful to me. I absolutely loved it, and I'm eager to share the digital copy with you. So head over to paolalane.com/read for free. There's no spaces in that. It's just read for free. Again, that's paolalane.com/read for free. And you will gain access to this exclusive bonus content for my podcast listeners. It's my way of saying thank you for being here and for your support. In episode 1, I talked about breaking that ice, breaking that fear of taking that first step. And in this episode, I really talked about the power of restarting of what's in your hand. And so I just want to encourage you. What is it in your life? It doesn't have to be related to business. It could be multiple things. It could be restoring a relationship. It could be starting a new practice that's it can be anything. There's something in your heart. Is there a long lost dream? Maybe you've forgotten all about that. And you don't have to necessarily see that dream right now, but pray and ask God. That's part of living a God-infused life, is inviting Him into your day. And when you hear a whisper in your heart, saying yes to that. That's all I did. I started with the very little thing I had, and He just kept leading me one little step at a time until I realized that I was holding my dream in my hands. And if I had started way back then thinking I'm going to start a magazine, I don't know that I would ever have gotten here. I had to just get up in the morning and say yes to God. And that's what I do. I still do it to this day. I wake up and I say, God, I say yes to what you have for me today. So I encourage you, wake up in the morning or even right now and just say, God, I say yes to what you have for me today, and allow Him to drop ideas into your heart, and then take those first steps. Go back to episode 1 and listen to that if you need to. Just take that first step and then see where He goes from there, because you never know how He's going to lead you into something that you could have never imagined. That's far better than what you could ever imagine. Thank you for joining me today on Unveiled Life and Godliness. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to share it with a friend, subscribe, leave me a review, and remember, you can always visit my website at paolalane.com for more free content and to learn more about Paola Lane Magazine, as well as all the information and resources you need for the Unveiled podcast. Our podcast is published twice a month, and until next time, may your life become increasingly unveiled through God-infused living.